Well, those figures also highlight another problem, lack of statistics. While sexual harassment exists everywhere, it's difficult to document since it's wildly underreported. Well, joining me now to discuss the issue further is Caren Goldberg, Associate Professor of Management at Bowie State University in Maryland. She conducts research on sexual harassment and testifies in workplace harassment cases. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So when you have some of these high-profile cases and social media platforms now that people can speak out on, does that tend to encourage people and companies to speak up or not?
I think it does, and certainly we saw that when Anita Hill testified when Clarence Thomas was being moved into the Supreme Court in the United States. We saw a huge spike in sexual harassment claims that never went down historically since then.
So when inappropriate sexual behavior does happen in the workplace, what are some of the misconceptions that tend to surround this issue?
Well, I think the big question that people ask is, well, why didn't she just report him? And I say she, although, as you mentioned, sometimes it is men. Why don't they just report? And the reality is there is a legitimate fear of repercussions, retaliation, and generally speaking, people who report don't get ahead.
Because there is that fear then, if you do report it, someone might believe you, they might not, but they also might judge you as well. So
Right.
How does that affect in terms of productivity, not only for the employees involved, but also a company's bottom line?
Right, it's a whole climate issue because within a work group, if one person speaks out and says, I've been harassed, although he or she may have some people who believe her or him, they also may have other people that tend to ostracize them and put them back in line. So it affects not just the individual who's been harassed, but his or her entire work group and or organization as well.
Now, as we look at something from a company's perspective, tell us about some of the costs involved at the different stages. You have the prevention, you also have the fallout, not only for the people involved, but also in terms of the PR scandal that can also come with this.
Right. I think companies often overlook some of the potential costs, and oftentimes, even where preventative measures are implemented, they're very basic and probably not very effective. So we know training, for example, organizations often put a little check mark next to a box. Yes, we've provided training, but in order for training to be effective, it needs to be reasonably long. It needs to be face-to-face, as opposed to computer-based. And it needs to be recurrent. And most organizations just do a one-shot deal.
Now, are there certain industries where we tend to see that this type of harassment is more prevalent than others?
Generally speaking, you see male-dominated industries tend to have more sexual harassment. And a lot of times it's because sexual harassment is about power. Male-dominated industries tend to have people in power positions who are men, who are harassing people who are in less powerful positions, typically women.
So then, outside of doing the bare minimum of having these once-in-a-while meetings, what can companies really do to discourage this whole environment of inappropriate behavior?
I think a lot of it really lies on not just changing the harasser's behavior or encouraging victims to speak up, but on trying to shift the culture so that people who observe it or suspect, like in the Weinstein case, everybody knew what was going on, but nobody said anything. So creating a culture where people feel comfortable saying, hey, I saw this and this wasn't right, or saying to the perpetrator, hey, that's not really appropriate.
And then from the reporting perspective, what can companies do to encourage people to speak up without this fear of retaliation, or that it might perhaps affect their promotion options?
I think having a credible investigative system is critical, where the investigator not simply wants to say, okay, I did an investigation, here's my report, it's done, and that's the end of the story, but to truly find out, are these allegations true? And if there are multiple allegations, and some of them are true, then maybe we should question the credibility of all of the allegations.
Certainly a lot to consider there. Thank you so much, Caren Goldberg,
Thank you very
Associate
much.
Professor of Management at Bowie State University.